right about now. Hey, everybody. In a society captivated by dark intricacies of true crime, we find ourselves glued to our screens, dissecting each plot point and devouring the suspense. It's all as if we're turned into, amateur detectives, piecing together clues and predicting outcomes as these harrowing real life stories unfold before our eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourself for an electrifying episode of A Funny Way of Looking with our guest, Robert Riggs, a titan in investigative journalism. Robert has bagged both the Peabody and Alfred I. DuPont Awards. Just think, Oscars and Pulitzer of broadcast journalism. He's an intrepid reporter who is embedded with the army in Iraq, exposed corrupt politicians, and driven seismic changes in public policy. Currently, the mastermind behind the riveting True Crime Reporter podcast, Robert has also been a go-to expert for media giants like ABC Nightline and CBS 60 Minutes as we dive deep into the complex world of crime, justice, and societal dilemmas. Prepare for a roller coaster ride that will both fascinate and terrify you. So, here we go. Robert, I am so glad to have you on the show today.
I'm humbled by that introduction.
It's all
is that
true.
me?
So,
Is that all me?
right, is it? Hey,
Uh,
we're going to start out the good way. Who do you want to do a shout out to?
I want to shout out to the men and women from law enforcement that are in my television documentary called Freed to Kill about serial killer Kenneth McDuff, one of the most notorious serial killers in the U.S. that you've probably never heard of.
I have not, but I'm sure I will now.
And if they had not really gone all in, there would have been so many more women murdered. We'll never know how many women he abducted and murdered. But thankfully, for their hard work, tenaciousness, and not giving up, they got him off the streets eventually. And then I had a whole expose going on about how he got out of prison. A serial killer got out of prison under a cloud of corruption.
Wow.
But my shout outs to law, the dedicated detectives, Texas Rangers, U.S. Marshals, that and investigators and other agencies, ATF, that they don't make a lot of money, but they're what I've seen is they're professional, hardworking, and unfortunately, they're not getting a lot of respect these days.
I think that is a fabulous shout out, and like maybe we need more of those. So I'm gonna we'll post that. You know what? I may just copy that shout out and post it into the comments after the show. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to hit true crime today, and I want to do it from a slightly different perspective than a lot of people probably do true crime. I want to hear about the serial killers and the bank heists and all that. But today we're going to talk about the audience, and we're going to talk about the people who are really into true crime also. So let me just set it up and ask you this question. Walk us through why people seem like. Why are they like irresistibly drawn to true crime?
I think it's probably a little bit of what draws me. I have interviewed every type of conceivable criminal, from serial killers, mass killers, serial child molesters, bank robbers, you name it, And I'm drawn kind of to it, like, what makes them tick? And you kind of never really get there, but what makes them tick? Is it nurture or nature? I know in my audience, and my audience is about 70% female, 25 to 54. I know the ladies that listen, they have the same interest, but in a sense of, well, do I know someone like this? Do I have a significant other that might be like this? And they also are interested about, if I had been a victim, could I have survived? Could I have gotten away? And then I think we always try to offer some of these up of tips for prevention, how to protect yourself. The men, 30% of my audience is men, and what they like about true crime are the procedurals. They want to hear that the bad guy or the bad lady got caught, and how.
Mhm.
How did the detectives do this? And that's the part that really fascinates me, is the how, the work that went into it. And unless you've ever been a member of a jury at a major criminal, like a capital murder trial, it's only then you really learn how much effort goes into an investigation and then the prosecution.
Yeah. I don't understand it. Every time I turn on something like a Dateline or your podcast and start talking about true crime, I'm like sucked in, and I just wonder, like, before they give us the next punchline, can I figure out who it is? Do you think there's like something, I don't know, psychological built in it? Like, I'm surprised really that it's mostly women that watch and listen to your
Well,
podcast.
yeah,
Why is that?
I do think it's something psychological in us that's been in us about survival. I've done just some research, and I've been trying to gather information and stuff about why, to write an article about it, maybe do a podcast episode about it. But I've looked back at Victorian London, and in those days, you had something called the penny dreadfuls. They sold for a penny, and they were these sort of scandal sheets of they gave the latest on the
Hmm.
big crimes and stuff. But the thing that shocked me, they'd have 30,000 people show up to witness a public hanging. That's
Oh, right,
true crime
right.
fan right there.
It's like there's nothing better to do on a Friday night. Let's go watch the hanging.
Yeah. So this is this has been with us, and of course, murder in our society and culture goes back thousands and thousands of years. Um, there was a kind of a mummified. He was called the Iceman. I believe he was found buried in the Swiss ice, 10,000 years old, and I've been doing some research on it, and they found he'd been murdered. He'd been shot in the back with an arrow. So, uh, yeah, this is what happens today is nothing new.
Oh my gosh. That I gotta ask you about, like, you report on all of these crimes, right? And so you write the stories, you interview the
Correct.
victims as well as the actual criminals, and you interview like the police and all this kind of stuff. Um, Is there ever like any kind of, when you're telling the stories, is there ever kind of like any ethical line that you have to stay behind when you're telling the stories so that it doesn't become like exploitive, or like how do you judge that? How do you work that into your podcast?
I think you have to be very careful, and this is a complaint I've got about many, many true crime podcasts. I want to tell the host, someone died here. A
Hmm.
family lost a family member. This affects them for the rest of their lives. So that's where you want to walk a fine line that you are not offending um, the victims' families, or if
Hmm.
it's if it's a victim of rape or something, and you just you got to be careful. So I try to be professional and factual, not sensational, not giggly. There's a lot of them that giggle, and they have I like, oh, fake, stuff like that. No, just the facts, ma'am.
What do you think about these? And this is not true. Well, it might be true crime. You got incidents that are happening. Instead of people helping, they're actually got their cell phones out filming for, the next YouTube post that they're going to make, or TikTok. What do you think about that? Kind of weird.
That just seems to be pervasive in our society, that everybody with a phone is a voyeur now.
Yeah.
When, perhaps they need to help, render aid, put on a tourniquet or whatever, but they're busy getting that moment.
Yeah.
And I, if you go to various tourist spots, it's like everybody is experiencing it through the phone. It's like, okay. Um,
Yeah. So,
so yeah, it bothers me.
yeah.
It's like, hey, you know,
Yeah.
why?
I wanted to hit that
It's
for a
like
second.
it's like people think, well, I've got to have my moment. Oh God, this is going to be a great social media moment. Might get me
Right.
more followers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How do you approach like sensitivity? And we going back to, like, the rape victim or the family and all that kind of stuff. How do you approach that?
Well, I really try to be very professional and factual, and not embellish with adjectives and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, and and I've had episodes with crime victims on, um, families, mothers of crime victims, and you want to
Mhm.
be sort of soft spoken with them.
Yeah.
And I've got an episode that's very, very popular, and it's by the little girl. She was then a little girl who grew up next door to Ted Kaczynski, the bomber,
Oh,
the
yeah.
Unabomber. Fascinating story. Fascinating story.
Well,
So, I could see people could come on and really sensationalize it, but I'm an old school reporter. I
yeah.
just don't believe in doing that. I just look. Let me just tell you the story as we know it.
Have there ever been stories that you decided not to do because of like any of the ethical concerns, or it might like hurt the people, or anything like that?
Oh yeah, in your career, there's always stuff like that. Now, I will tell you, as one of the things that bothered me back in reporting is that in television, there'd be some incident, shootings, what have you, and they would send um, reporters to the homes. I would never do this, to knock on the door of the victim's family to try to get a comment. Um,
Right.
well, how did it feel and this sort of stuff. Well, here's what I know from doing these. The victims' families are in shock. They're really not of presence of mind, really, to talk. And I just don't think it's ethical to
Mm-mm.
go to them then. If it's going to be a serious story later, the public can learn from. Go sit down with them later. But it should be what is the public going to learn from this? Well, if it's just that they're sobbing and weeping and they're sad, well, we all know that, you
Yeah.
know. Um, so that's you got to be careful about not crossing that line. And that was something I abhorred in the industry, and I would not do it. Would
I
not do it.
Who was it? Was it Robert Palmer that had that song about, uh, go out and get the next line, is the head dead yet? And go Dirty Laundry. That was the name of the song.
Yeah,
Uh,
that is with the Eagles drummer singer, not Glenn Fry. God, I'm going blank.
yeah, I can't remember
He
Dirty
lives here in
Laundry.
Dallas.
Oh, really?
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, Dirty Laundry. Yeah,
Dirty Laundry.
and
That's the song.
I think that stemmed from, maybe his name will come from me. He was in a lawsuit, and I think his wife was suffering. What was she suffering from? Lupus, something, something debilitating. And they
Mm.
called her to testify and just to really just make a
Don Henley.
Don Henley to make an
There we
issue
go.
of it. Yeah,
Don Henley.
court and the Eagles, among my favorite bands, Don Henley and Glenn Fry. When Glenn Fry passed away, I was like, "Ooh, this is getting close to home." One side story:
Yeah.
there's a Tex-Mex place here in Dallas called Mia's, and it used to be just a hole in the wall. And I love going in there. I love the food, and I remember walking in there one day, and there was Don Henley and Glenn Fry sitting with caps pulled down, kind of incognito, but talking. And I thought, I wonder if they're writing a song or they're talking about the next thing. And nobody bothered them and stuff. And they were, interestingly, they were sitting at the same table where Jerry Jones reputedly inked the deal to buy the Cowboys.
There you go.
Yeah. Now Mia's has moved on to a bigger location. They were so popular, but I loved it when it was that little tiny place and old school. But you never knew who you'd see in there. You might see Robert Riggs.
Oh man. So let's keep talking about this, the cell phone and being able to just, and not engaging but just taking pictures. Like, how has, like, do you think technology has changed the way that, um the whole, empathy for people, the ethics for people, and everything has changed? Like, how has technology changed, just crime in general, true crime?
Well, in terms of
What do you think?
social media, there's been plenty written about this, but you have trolls and
Mhm.
what have you, and the toxicity of the nasty things. People can be anonymous. My wife is fond of saying, now she was in the entertainment business on stage at one point in her career, and I've asked her, like, were these feelings and emotions, were they really always in people? And she said, "Yeah, I think many people always wanted to be the star in their own movie, but there was no way they're ever going to get cast because they didn't have
Hmm.
talent. Well, now anybody with a cell phone has access to do whatever. Of look at me, look at me, look at me."
Yeah.
And frankly, she's a person that was on stage. She hates having her picture taken, doesn't want anything. And even though I was a guy on television, I'm not all that. I'm still kind of an introvert, if you
Uh,
know what I'm saying,
no, I'm a total introvert. I
Yeah,
totally get that. Believe me.
yeah. That probably sounds weird, but I'm not one to really go, "Hey, look what we're doing."
Yeah.
So,
I am. I'm fascinated about true crime and the availability of information around the world. And I just wonder, now you've been doing this for decades,
mhm.
can people literally like get on the internet, do some research, watch the TV shows, listen to the podcast, interview people, and then ever come up with like the perfect crime? Do you think is it possible? Or is there too much technology on the other side that says, nope, caught you before you even got out the door?
Well, even when there wasn't the technology,
Mhm.
it never goes according to plan. There's always something hiccup, something like that, something. So I've really never seen that perfect crime in all the stuff I covered. And one of the things I've seen in crimes is that people commit crimes or a murder of a spouse or something, and they stage it, but they stage it the way they've seen it on television, and it doesn't
That
happen
was
that
it.
way. And
Okay.
it gives itself away, you know.
Uh, Why? I mean, you see the Hollywood directors and the writers, and they've all got their scripts. We've all seen Ocean's 11, bank robberies and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Why is it that people can't get away? Is it because it's too romanticized? It's because it's their first one and they get messed up? Like, why?
You
What
know,
makes it so hard?
we're all human. We're not perfect.
Yeah.
And then there's the other thing of they'll tell somebody,
Uh,
and there's never a secret.
Loose
Uh,
lips.
in the criminal world, uh, you know, somebody will always flip on somebody. And I'll give you an example. I did a series years ago with cooperation from the FBI when identity theft was just starting. This was a landmark series, and uh, there was a guy traveling around the country, and he really had this perfect scheme for doing counterfeit, fraudulent checks coming in, hitting banks and stuff for 300 grand, and they would be gone. And when I looked over it, I was thinking, wow, this is this guy was doing the perfect crime. But he got involved in something, told another guy about it. That guy got busted by the FBI on another charge, unrelated. And he says to them, let's make a deal. I can tell you about a huge case. And the FBI had to solve this case, and it was going on all over the country. It was huge. And so there was the mistake, I remember discussing with my father-in-law. I thought, maybe if you would just do one or two of these and stop, you might get away with it, but they don't. Yeah.
Yeah, if people just have to talk. I guess that's the whole problem right there. So
Yeah.
you got
Well, and
like
I have to say, as a
witnesses.
reporter on those kind of financial crimes, you're learning all the details and you're thinking, I wonder if I might.
Well, I've wondered that. It's like it's almost like you're getting a PhD in true crime. You're seeing where all the mistakes are. What do you, it sounds like people talking too much is the biggest mistake. Like,
Oh, I see that happen
yeah.
in everything. Yeah, I mentioned the television show with Kenneth McDuff. I found out that as publicity was everywhere about the abduction of Colleen Reed from a car wash at Christmas in Austin, Texas. She was this young accountant that um, um, McDuff's had told associates and stuff about it and everything else. And there were in criminal circles, there was talk about it.
Hmm.
And then when Later, when one of them, they were already on his trail, but then later, when one of them got in trouble, was getting busted, she suddenly ups that, well, by the way, that girl that disappeared in Austin, that was Kenneth McDuff. So it's, I don't know, I guess there's something human about we just can't keep a secret. Now, in McDuff's case, he was what the FBI categorized as a sadistic sexual serial killer, which meant his real pleasure wasn't the sexual assault, it was the torture and the suffering of the
Mm.
victim. And he usually had an accomplice, and the accomplice was ne'er do well, not strong personality, a follower. And he picked them that way because he could control them. But he needed this is crazy. He needed an audience. Murder was like performance art for him.
I'm shocked. Is there like a what do you want to call this, profile of a serial killer? Because I remember you and I talking before. You said they look kind of normal. Um,
Well,
what's a serial?
that's the one common thing I've always seen. They look very normal, don't stand out, just like, you know, like McDuff. I've got pictures of him in civilian clothes.
Hmm.
Yeah, just looks like a big goofus. When you see him in his mugshots and other things, and you know what he did, then it's like, ooh, this is the boogeyman. But what I try to emphasize to people, particularly women, because they're the target of these guys, is that they they're not going to look like the boogeyman. Same on child predators as well. They used to teach stranger danger, and that which was just all wrong.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's going to be the scout leader. Might be the minister, people that parents trust, and they're very normal. Um, so that's the one thing. Nobody shows up with uh, horns like the devil. Now there are now I just did a thing about there's been a deadly war going on between the outlaw motorcycle gangs around the Southwest, and
Hmm.
if you see those guys out, they're all they look worse than Sons of Anarchy. They're all kind of you know um, threatening looking. You know,
Have you actually interviewed those guys like in person or
I
over?
have I've during my career, yes, I have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I interviewed mobsters when I was in New York. So, yeah.
When you are interviewing the mobsters, you're interviewing the gangs and all this. I mean, are you like afraid, or are they just like, hey, let's have a coffee and we'll talk? But how is it? I don't get it.
I, you know, I guess in my case, you've done it so much, you're not affected, and was kind of my personality. But no, I know one thing: you don't show fear. You want to have a strong presence and let them know, that you're here, you mean business. But I was always respectful, and I was always and it's still to this day, I'm very successful in interviews with inmates and ex-cons because I don't go off on some preaching of judgment and everything. I just talk to them about their background and stuff like that. Because what I'm just trying to bring out them and why and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Have you ever talked to like somebody and you're interviewing them and you all of a sudden you go, "This is the guy. This is the criminal," but you I don't know if you say it to them, or how do you handle
Well,
that when you've
e-
discovered?
everyone that I was ever interviewing, they'd been caught.
Okay.
Yeah, they'd all been caught. Um, yeah, I remember being in a prison in West Texas, and I was doing a series about child predators, serial predators, and I'd heard about this guy, older guy, and I got an interview with him, and I'm interviewing him. I got my camera crew there, and I'm interviewing him. He's sitting on his bunk, and I was I mean, this is going to sound odd to the listeners, but this is kind of how things come out. It's
Hmm.
a technique that was used. I also know was used by the profilers, the original ones at the FBI. Sort of sympathetic. And I'd listen and stuff, and um, and they'd open up. They'd feel like, "Oh, Robert, you're my friend. You understand." Well, near the end of the conversation, I mean, I'm talking about, well, how do you pick the right child? Stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
And I do open-ended questions as well because you never know what you're going to get. I don't ask questions that are going to be a yes or no answer. And he gets off his bunk and he's got this kind of hiding place and he pulls out like it's thick, it's 2 inches thick. And it's a manual on how to lure children.
This is something he's
Mainly,
written in prison.
oh yeah, he's written it in prison, and he had told me, and what kind of led to it. He kept telling me, well, they have a look. They have this look of hunger in their eyes, and I was like, yeah, I've never seen that. What is that? And I kept, well, let me show you. And kind of, he just got into it. He pulls out this manual, and he had clipped ads from magazines for products, all stuff with children, of examples of, yeah, that's the look, that's the kid I'm after, and he had long descriptions of how to operate, and even during the interview described them. And now I have to tell you, as a reporter, I'm sitting there like, holy cow,
Yeah.
uh, it's like you're looking at the career like you are rolling on this, aren't you? Um, And by the end of the interview, he gave me his manual. I said,
Really.
"Well, I mean, it sure would help me in just doing this." He gave me the manual, and I immediately gave the manual to the profiler at the FBI in Quantico that worked the child cases, and they used it in the interview, a raw interview for teaching agents, because it was something they'd never seen. They just
I'm
never.
already sitting here with my head blown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I have to tell you, Um, you got to put on your game face because, particularly children, it's the most disgusting, disturbing, make you sick, make you want to wring them by the neck while you're sitting there. But
Mhm.
you know that I'm not going to get anything that can kind of tell people until I, you know, play the game.
He was already caught, and I, uh, I don't know if this is
Well,
true
the
or not, but was
the
he
shame
separated from general population?
he
Because
was
like I,
he was a serial offender. He had been in and out, in and out, in and out. So yeah,
was he separated from everybody else? Because
no,
my
no.
hearing is that child molesters don't make it long in prison.
That's kind of become a myth.
Myth.
The thing is, the prison system has really become pretty hardcore, and also a lot of people don't talk about what they do. Now, I do know cases, and I know of a particular case where they found out a guy had uh, raped and murdered a little Hispanic girl, and the Hispanic gangs in the prison
Mhm.
heard about it, and the guy in the chow was eating in the chow hall, and a gang member walked by him and in a split second cut his throat, and he was dead right there. And it was like, you offended our race, that sort of thing. But otherwise, not a lot. Some of them they try to put on other units, segregated, that kind of thing.
Mhm. Okay. Who's the scariest guy that you ever, or woman that you ever interviewed?
Hmm. Somebody that would be scary in public, could be scary in public. Golly, there's so many. Um, the Now, Kenneth McDuff, the serial killer, who he hated me, but I wouldn't have worried about him out in public because he was a guy. He's a big guy, but he's a bully, and
Mhm.
his preferential victim was a short, petite brunette, 5 foot or less that he could control. But you know, a guy he kind of back would back off on. Although, I interviewed his cellmate at one point from a maximum security unit, and they
Mhm.
talked about he um, had this explosive temper and might just go off unexpected. It would scare everyone. Um, the Um, there's a mass killer I've interviewed who, during the interview, told me he'd like to shoot me. Um, and I mean, the guy was he was an SMU business grad and stuff, highly educated, but he just problems. And he had ridden around Dallas on his Harley at night, randomly killing truckers and stuff in traffic.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a fascinating interview, because I'm in like, why? And he said at the beginning of the interview, what I'm going to say to you is going to make no sense. And there became a moment where he saw the look on my face like, you got to be kidding me. And he smiles and laughs and says, I told you it wasn't going to make any sense. But the irrational motivation. So in his case, and I have a podcast with uh, from the interview with him. In his case, he said he was extremely angry about the unfairness of life, and he was very uh, upset that John Kennedy, the son of the president, who crashed in his plane and stuff, that he had all of this notoriety and attention and wealth. And he said, and that just pees me off.
Yeah.
It just ate him up to see people. He thought I'm working hard and all. I'm not getting anywhere, and this is unfair. And I looked at him at one point and said, life is not fair. And he gave me this look, and yeah.
Do you have guards in the cells with you while you're interviewing these people?
Sometimes, uh, they're always standing somewhere nearby. Funny you should ask that. So, I was doing a series about frivolous lawsuits by
Mhm.
inmates, and it was a huge problem. And they were filing these frivolous lawsuits in federal courts, and I found it. I mean, by the dozens and dozens, and it was causing a big problem. And I was able to find out they were doing it because that meant they got a bus trip, uh, or in a prison bus
Mhm.
to federal court. They got out of prison. They just wanted to go out and see stuff. And um, I had and I used to like. They don't even really permit it anymore. I used to like to do my interviews one on one, not not behind bars. Now they put them in cages. There's a
Mhm.
cage, and especially death row. And but I preferred, knee to knee, folding chairs to do the interview. And so I'd heard about this inmate. He'd filed all of these lawsuits. My God, it cost the state so much money. And one of his lawsuits, he had sued because his Rice Krispies did not go snap, crackle, pop.
Uh-huh.
I kid you not. Snap, crackle, pop. So I'm like, this is so over the top. And I thought this is going to be some interview. And so the door opens, and two guards bring in this guy, and he's a giant. Oh my God, he's like 7 feet. Um, and I mean, he's just huge. His arms, his biceps are bigger than my thighs.
Uh-huh.
And they no hand. They take his handcuffs off, sit him down in the chair, and they go, "Oh, Robert, he's all yours. We'll be outside." And they slam the door, and I'm like, and the crew's looking at me like, "No, are you sure this is a good idea?"
Yeah.
But again, I was polite and everything else, and inquisitive, and I didn't do confrontational kind of stuff. So he never got mad. He kind of, laughed about it and stuff. So it turned out to be a really good interview.
Wow.
So,
Uh,
yeah.
do you think any of the serial killers and murderers or heist people that they actually do reform in prison and they're sorry, and if they
No.
got back out, they'd be okay, or no?
Oh God, no.
No.
The career violent felons, and especially the serial killers, don't let them out. Do
Yeah.
I don't see anything in prison systems today that bring about any reform in for violent crimes. And I'm kind of like you. You need to reserve prisons for violent crimes. Now, other kind of offenses, the robberies, the serial thieves and stuff like that. Yeah, I had I did a podcast episode with a project that in which they teach inmates. Now
Hmm.
you got to qualify how to come out of prison to be entrepreneurs, and they have to really want it. They've got to apply. They've got to write a long paper about what they want to do, and they've got a great rate for inmates not reoffending and coming back, and actually having thriving businesses out here.
Okay.
Um, but they're not the killers. They're not the that sort of stuff. Um, and it's a privately funded deal. It's not state money, and they're in some of our prisons, but you really have to jump through hoops as an inmate and show that you want it, that you want it. Now they've had some failures, guys reoffended, but it's probably one of the most impressive things that I ever
Wow.
saw the prison system. The other thing I'd seen was Chuck Colson, who was in the Watergate thing, who then later he reformed, and he had a prison ministry. I saw that as the way they did it was pretty effective. The important thing is for when they come out, they can't go back to the old neighborhood and the old friends at all, or they'll be
Hmm.
right back in it. So it is it's tough that where do you start? Um, I've got uh, he was a longtime source. Uh, Really helped me in investigating the corruption. He was a gang member, and he knew because he was a ranking member in a gang. He knew everything going on in every prison, and he'd taken a liking to me, and was really a confidential source. And the other interesting thing about him, he was a Mensa. He was a genius. He had taken every college class offered in the Texas system. He'd taken every trade school class, and he recently got out after doing 44 years. Can you imagine?
No,
And
could
he's
you trust him?
he's talked about he got out and was like, what is a cell phone? What is this? What is this? And so he began writing a book that he smuggled out in pieces about life inside. And it's very well written. Um, but there's certain context and stuff like that. But it's the nitty gritty of what goes on in a prison. And he's so articulate and all. We're going to work on. I'm going to work on an audio book with him because somebody who spent that much time,
Hmm.
who Lord, gang members came by, threw a chain around his cell, put a padlock on it, and threw Molotov cocktails in, trying to burn him alive. It's a real life story that you don't really ever see or hear about, and he's got it. He lived it, and so I'm breaking down the book, trying to figure out, okay, how do we turn this into a, like a compelling podcast, but it's an audio book. And I think people will be very interested because it is so different. You
I'm
know.
interested right now, and I'm just listening to you
Yeah.
talk, and I can't close my mouth. I've been trying, but it just keeps falling back open. So,
Well, he had been the reputed. I mean, he had a reputation, the reputed hitman for a gang. Feared. Um, you would, if you saw him, you'd like, "Are you kidding me?" Because he was kind of a shorter, wiry guy. But he was brilliant, smart guy, and he would always say to me that, well, I'm out of the gang. I renounced it. I was like, hey, blood in, blood out, baby. Why? I don't know. I don't, why are you still alive? And he would laugh and all of this. And in the prison system, in the main corridors, uh, there's about 3 foot out from each sidewall is a yellow line, and the inmates have to stay within that yellow line. The center is staff and stuff, but inmates do not do not get outside that line. You know, Johnny Cash talked about walking the line.
Mm-hmm.
And there, it's just like traffic coming, opposite directions. And this is back in the day where I really had free run of the prisons, and Johnny and I are walking together, going from some other one place to the other. And I start noticing that every inmate coming to us is looking down, or some are even stopping and turning to the wall.
Uh-huh.
And uh, the inmates that we're walking up on are like, they're getting out of the way. No one wants to look at him. And I said, hey, if you're out of the gang, hey, why is everyone turning their heads and eyes down? They don't want to think they've disrespected you. And he just laughed. Oh, they're just polite. And I said, look, and we even recently had a conversation about his reputation. He, he was a reputed hitman, never got prosecuted, never caught for any murders in the system, but boy, people think he did them. And I said to him, hey, what about it? I'd asked you about it before. And he always said, well, you can get a paper, inmate gets a paper cut in the morning in a maximum security unit. And by the end of the day, they say, I've cut off his head. And he laughs about it. So, he talks around it, talks
Uh-huh.
around it. Yeah. But it's something that the public, boy, will it be an insight. It's just one of those stories you don't get. It's just so rare. And then everybody's going to wonder, what makes this guy tick? He's so smart. Um, and he did 44 years because of stuff he also did after he got in prison. Like he had 6 prison escapes. Um, I remember I was on a maximum security unit interviewing another inmate.
Mm-hmm.
Podcast is about him. Dennis Hope, the notorious prison escapee. Fascinating story. And I hear my guy Johnny is there. And um, he is out working in the warden's vegetable and rose garden. And I go out to see him, and he's, tilling the soil and everything else. And I look around and I open my jacket and I said, hey, I don't have a recorder running. We've talked about this. The camera crew's inside, no microphone. People say you blew people up in prison with bombs. Now, would you tell me, how does somebody build a bomb in prison?
Uh-huh.
And he got this big smile on his face, and he's holding a hoe in one hand, and he looks down. And when we look down, he's tapping his toe on the 50-pound bag of fertilizer. And he says, hey, I knew about fertilizer bombs long before those boys in Oklahoma City. And I thought, oh my God. So I knew the warden. And so I got to tell the warden. And he
Uh-huh.
knows I told the warden. I go in and tell the warden, I said, hey, why do you have Johnny out here in your rose and vegetable garden right out here? And he said, because you got to keep your enemies close in this place. I want to know what he's doing. So I told him the story of what had just happened. The warden just dropped his head. It was like, oh my God, you're kidding. I never even thought, So yeah.
Wow. I guess you get resourceful.
Yeah. And a
Well,
week later, he walked out the front gate dressed as a guard.
and he got caught again and put back in, I'm guessing.
Of course he
Yes.
got caught
Yeah.
again.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I could listen to you tell stories like for the next hours and hours and hours.
Mhm.
I want to do something.
Well, you'll have to come on the podcast and
I
listen.
will have
We're
to
there
come
all
on
the
the
time.
podcast. I actually want to get you and Doug Knowles together and talk and see what goes on between your two minds. That would be amazing to talk about. Um,
And
I
tell
want
the
to.
listeners, Doug Knoll is in California, was a civil lawyer and got the calling to help in prisons. And he came up with this methodology of quieting an angry person in 90 seconds. Couldn't we all use that?
We definitely could use that. Um, let's find out about more about you. We've talked about the serial killers and the heist and the child abductors and all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about Robert Riggs. We're going to play a game for a second
Mm.
called This or That. I'm going to give you two choices. You can pick one or the other, but not neither or both. And if you have to justify anything, yeah, we could do that maybe too. And you know what? I'm gonna start with super, super, super simple and pedestrian. You're only the third person I have ever asked this question to, and the question is coffee or tea?
Coffee,
Yeah, morning or night? Do you do it?
morning, 2
Okay.
cups.
Morning reporting or night reporting?
Reporting,
Yeah,
night.
night. Okay. True crime books or true crime documentaries?
I don't do either. It's
Hmm.
strange because that's my world. If I'm reading a book, it's history or it's business.
Okay. Don't
It's
neither
it's
one. Or
about things I don't know about.
gotcha. How about paper notes or digital notes?
I do a combination. I do paper.
Hmm.
I've always had the reporter's notebook. But if something is important, I find I need to write it by hand. And there's brain research around this that if you put it down by hand, it sticks in your brain.
Yeah.
So I will also kind of copy and put things in digital so they're searchable. So I'm a blend of both.
Yeah, I agree with you about the paper thing. It's just like a feel and a something to paper that you
Yeah,
don't get with digital, you
yeah.
know? Solo investigation or team investigation?
Team.
Okay. When you go out, have you ever done the solo or is you mostly team, all team?
I was always the leader of the team. I had a
Mhm.
producers and stuff like that, but they were terrific.
Okay.
It was just it had you just have to work together.
Yeah.
And I think okay, early in my career, solo. I did solo
Mhm.
stuff, but later, as you advance in more complex stories, team.
Team. Got it. How about interviewing victims or interviewing law enforcement?
Well, I'd rather
Mm.
interview law enforcement on how they do, and it's solely because the pain in the victims, the
Okay.
pain.
That
It
goes back
just
to our
that
ethics that we were talking
well,
about.
and that you know, in my Free to Kill, I've got the victims in there and the
Uh-huh.
families, and they need to be there. The public needs to understand what this does to people, but these are tough interviews because you're bringing back these awful events in their life that still affect them.
Yeah.
And there was a moment, Colleen Reed's sister, I took her back to the church where they had the service for her sister that was murdered by Macduff. And, like I say, I'll ask open ended questions, things I don't know the answer to. And I said to her, when you're alone at night, what do you and your sister talk about? Now her sister's deceased. And boy, did it come out because she did have conversations about the
Mhm.
sister she missed. And what she described and the anguish, boy, and tears, you, the viewer, really got a feel for what suffering is put on these people by violent criminals. And I
Yeah.
thought that I wanted people to understand the consequences. I think it's important in these kind of things that they need to hear it.
Yeah. Interesting. How about old unsolved cases or recent crimes?
Mix of both. It all depends on just how unusual the crime is. And
Uh-huh.
I don't do your garden variety stick ups and stuff like that. There's got to be some twist, something unusual, something that is challenging the detectives and all. So old would have been Macduff.
Mhm.
Uh, I've got one that I did not long ago about a murder in Austin, a love triangle murder, by involving these terrifically talented cyclists. And it's one of those things like, wow, What happened? Yeah, you had everything going for you. How did it get to this? So, yeah.
Don't you forget like scared that the some of these things are going to come back to you and people are going to go like that reporter, I'm going to find him, or does that ever haunt you?
That happened during my investigation of corruption in the system. When I began exposing that you could buy your way out, well, it ended. And then you had many, many inmates that were upset that I'd blown I'd blown their chances of getting out. So
Mm-hmm.
the anger was directed to me. There was a time when the U.S. attorney wanted to put U.S. Marshals at my home. I was like, you know, I'd been a staffer on a defense committee in Congress and trained by the Army in every weapon imaginable. I was like, I can take care of myself here. Um, and um, so the threats do happen.
Mm-hmm.
The You don't want it affecting, your family and stuff. And I had a case where a public official that eventually went to prison because of my reporting called and threatened my wife. Got her on the call, got the phone number, so she just delivered the threat to my wife for me. Now on the McDuff thing,
Mm-hmm.
all of that went away when he got caught and it came out, and he became the poster boy for change and cracking down on the laws. And he was the most hated man in the prison system. He was on death row. If I had death row inmates tell me if they open those doors, we're killing that guy. We're gonna kill him, tear him limb from limb.
Wow.
So I was like, well, thankfully they don't think of Robert in this anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. How about local crimes or international crimes?
God, then it all depends.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, International, there was a point in my career I was doing terrorism, before 9/11. Interesting, before 9/11 and then after 9/11. And that was international, was in London, in the UK, and places. And those were fascinating stories, very different. And then local, it just, if it there are huge corruption cases that are interesting. It's just not violent crime; it's other kinds of crimes.
Yeah. Do you see crimes that are going on and you're like, um, I wish I could expose this, but you're either too busy or it would take too long. Like, especially, I'll even go like, especially in like say politics, anything like that, where you just wish you could do something more about it.
Well, these days it's just Robert and some help. I don't have the resources that I had when I was at CBS and places, so uh, I'm not able to do things. One thing I do, I've got some volunteers that were in law enforcement. One that was a member of an FBI violent crime squad. I'll ask the person, "Hey, can I give this information to him and let him look around in it for
Mhm.
you?" So, you try the best you can to help.
Okay, gotcha. How about serial killers or masterminds?
Serial killers.
Okay.
It's just
Uh,
um it's just, you know, so you're just like, wow, nature or nurture.
gotcha. How about face-to-face interviews with criminals or anonymous tip-offs?
Well, I always prefer face-to-face interviews.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Um,
anonymous tips can be the bread and butter of an investigative reporter, but you got to go prove it. It can put you on the right track, but you got to go prove it.
gotcha. Okay. How about maintaining professional detachment or getting emotionally involved?
You try, and typically reporters, there is a detachment, but when you really get involved, like in this McDuff case, and others, where you're talking to the victims' families, and oh my God, you see the grieving going on. It does get to you. Matter
Hmm.
of fact, in that case, it got to the law enforcement officers. But it also fueled them like, we gotta we gotta solve this.
Yeah.
And there was a U.S. Marshal named Parnell McNamara. And Parnell today is the sheriff in Waco, McLennan County. And he was present for the confession of McDuff's accomplice about the murder of Colleen Reed. And he told me that driving back to Waco, he started crying
Mm.
and thinking of the horror and everything else. And he said to me, suddenly I wasn't the tough old bird and lawman maybe I thought I was. Now I want to tell you, this is a tough guy. Seen everything, done everything, old West family and law enforcement in Texas for 120 years. And cousin, by the way, of Taylor Sheridan.
Mhm.
And it got to him. But it also became a driving force for him as well.
Gotcha.
So I'll tell you, one of the things that was hard for me, I did 3 wars, but I was an embedded reporter in the last one with the lead unit in the invasion of Iraq.
Mhm.
So before the war began, I lived with them. We were there. I was in the tent, ate with them, tent with them. And so you began having a personal, you knew them. You knew everybody as a person. So it wasn't some anonymous body at a crime scene or accident or something like that. You knew them. Some I did stories with, and then they got killed. That kind of got to all of us in the crew,
Mm.
because they were people we knew. They, so that was rough. That I still think about it today.
I totally believe that. Let's. I got a couple more hard ones, and then I want to get to a couple of thought-provoking questions
Mhm.
for you. How about legal loopholes that free the guilty, or laws that incriminate the innocent?
Well, the Innocence Project has done great work about identifying wrongly convicted people. Now,
Mhm.
DNA has really been a big help in all of that, not only clearing the innocent, but also finding the guilty. Um, Legal loopholes, those sort of, I don't know that I've ever really seen those in cases.
Okay,
Look, if you're a good prosecutor, you ought to be able to do this, you know?
gotcha. Um, let's go thought-provoking for a second. Okay, knowing who committed a crime but not being able to prove it, or proving a crime but not knowing who did it.
Well, for me, the interest is the crime and not knowing who did it. And
Okay.
so I've been doing a series on cold cases. And, now with the use of forensic genetic genealogy, they're solving 40-year-old cases now.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, it is amazing. It is
That
amazing.
it brings me back to my question earlier about could someone ever commit the perfect crime, or just if
Mm.
you could keep your mouth shut, not tell anybody, look like a normal guy, could you get away with it? And it's like if you forgot to leave your cell phone home one day, you might just get caught.
Well, and so there are these cases where, people have gotten away with murder
Hmm.
and think they've gotten away with it. And now technology has caught up with them. And I've done in the podcast, I got a series about forensic genetic genealogy in cases. One about a serial rapist who, good gosh, he had raped so many women in Texas, and then using DNA, they these are old cases, but now they start applying this, and they find out he had victims in Oklahoma and Arkansas,
Wow.
and they tracked him down, and because they ran his DNA that was
Hmm.
left at crime scenes. They ran it through these social channels where people, are doing search, and they found family people on the family tree. And then so the detectives had new leads
Yeah.
to narrow down, and then so they identified him, and The FBI and the Dallas prosecutor and police worked on this. They put a hidden camera looking at his home uh, because they were doing, well, I call it dumpster diving, but they, in the middle of the night, they were taking things, trash, that where you might leave DNA, cups, what have you. And the camera was there to prove there were no other males going in there. None.
So, we all hear about this DNA and everyone just kind of throws it around. But when you talk about they found DNA, is it like the sci-fi level? It's like we found a crumb with his saliva on it, or is it like you got to find like a whole head of hair? What is it when you find DNA to prove something? How much do you need, and
Well,
what is it?
this is the big revolution in technology. So, um, they for years, like in rapes, for years they've taken the samples, they've got the DNA, and it is sat on shelves and stuff. Some never tested. There's a whole government program going on now where they are bringing it out and testing it.
Hmm.
And one of these victims had heard about this new testing and everything going on. She actually went to the police and got a detective like, hey, you thought about this? And they went in, they found her evidence stored, refrigerated, still to, this is 30 years later.
Uh-huh.
And so now they use forensic genetic genealogy. And the other thing that's happened with DNA testing, um, there are some labs that can take a minute sample. You can't even see it by the eye
Uh-huh.
and develop it. And in this case, they ran it then in the genetic websites and got onto the family tree.
Hmm.
And then actually what they go back and they start looking, they were reviewing their cold case files, and they often find these guys' names are in there. They just never had enough to get to them, or they're overdone.
Holy.
And so this guy, they put him away for the rest of, he's like 70. They put him away for the rest of his life.
Well,
And I have
well,
an episode about it. It's a fascinating episode.
thank you, Ancestry.com. All right, then.
Well, I don't know. Some of them do not participate. I don't think 23andMe will participate with law enforcement. Others
Okay.
do. Um, some of them have it set that you have to, and they don't really tell you it's there. You have
Mm.
to make a choice to click that law enforcement can have access. Uh, but it's the family tree.
Yeah, it's out there, right? So I got a couple more for you. How about revealing a source to solve a case or protecting your source at the cost of justice?
Well, if
Which,
the source has committed a crime, I'm not protecting them.
yeah, you're not the
And
priest.
there really there really is no such thing as a confidential source anymore in litigation. Uh, if you have a confidential source, the judge is going to ask you, if this story is based on that, let's hear who they are. The other side has a right to take their deposition and cross-examine them. So um, I I I didn't have confidential sources. I had sources that would provide tips and stuff like that
Hmm.
to lead me places, but nothing that would ever say they're because if you get sued, you're going to have to defend
Yeah.
every sentence. And this is why investigative reporting has really gone away in this age that, the newspapers have been financially gutted. Same thing has happened to broadcast news. And what's left, they don't really want to spend the money. And the litigation is very expensive, very
Okay.
expensive.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Last one. Last one. Uncover a deeply settling truth that could shake societal faith in the justice system, or withhold the information and maintain public order.
Oh no, I'm gonna,
Let it out.
I'm bringing it out. The
Okay.
McDuff case was a case of that, where um, the Texas system had been in trouble with the federal courts for more than 10 years for overcrowding. And the Democrats and the Republicans had run for reelection on law and order, and they were passing tougher laws, longer sentences. The problem is they didn't have any place to put them. And the jails in Texas had backed up. They had serious overcrowding. The sheriffs were mad. And the system was on the verge of getting taken over by a judge. And rather than suffer that political embarrassment controversy, the administration at the time ordered the parole board, who they appointed, let them out. And so one of the things we discovered in the investigation that came out was that they were releasing 140 inmates a day, 7 days a week.
Jesus.
And when one of the parole board members was really being grilled in a hearing that was based on my story, he suddenly lost it and told the truth and said, well, Senator, we're dragging the bottom of the barrel. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel, to make room.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, that caused an explosion. The legislature didn't even know that was going on. And suddenly it explained there'd been a huge spike in crime around Texas, particularly in Houston was off the charts. Other places, Central Texas, Fort Worth was bad.
Uh-huh.
And this was why they're letting the violent of the violent career criminals out. And the first thing they were doing was, like McDuff, the next day after he walked out of prison, he abducted a woman and killed her and continued on a spree for 3 years.
Jeez. All right. We're going to have to do this again. I'd love to be on your podcast one day and just listen to you, to talk to you some more. This is amazing. Either that or we'll just get together for coffee someday.
Coffee sounds great. I'm a coffee. It's got to be early morning.
I'll get up and do early morning instead of my normal get up at 10. So I definitely want people to be able to still check you out and learn more about you. We've got your website at truecrimereporter.com. And of course, you are all over the interwebs on Facebook and Instagram at True Crime Reporter. And you've got a LinkedIn going at Robert Riggs TV. And for everyone who's not actually watching but listening, Riggs is RIGGS, so Robert Riggs TV on LinkedIn. And you've got some YouTube going on at Robert Riggs True Crime Reporter. So this has been an absolutely fascinating.
And Michael, you can find the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. We're in Apple, Spotify, everywhere. And if you want to watch, we video, and you can actually watch the interview on YouTube. That. And YouTube is opening up Google Music to podcasts, so we'll be there soon too.
Is it really? I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a new
I've
thing.
got a subscription to it, so it'll be on mine for sure. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for checking us out at A Funny Way of Looking. We just started a brand new newsletter. You can find it at afunnywayoflooking.news. Check that out. And we're going to have Robert up there. Be sure to check out his websites, his Instagramming, and all that kind of stuff. And we will see you guys in the future. Thank you very much for being here, Robert. And thank you, everybody else, for watching.
Thank you.
We out.